She told me I was being selfish for missing my grandson's first birthday. I had just gotten out of the hospital 2 days before. Not the dramatic kind of hospital stay people imagine. No surgery, no ambulance lights. Just my blood pressure climbing high enough that my doctor looked me in the eye and said, "Nadine, I'm not letting you go home tonight." 68 years old, and my body had finally started sending memos I couldn't ignore. So I stayed. 2 nights. The second morning, a nurse named somebody I've already forgotten brought me a cup of terrible coffee and told me I had good color. I thanked her like that was an accomplishment. My daughter called on a Tuesday. I was still in the recliner my late husband had picked out, my legs elevated the way the discharge papers suggested, the blinds half open because full sun gave me a headache. Her name lit up the screen and I answered on the second ring, the way I always did. "Mom," she said, and her voice had that particular tightness I'd come to recognize over the years. Not worried tight. Inconvenienced tight. "I know you just got out, but Marcus and I really need you Saturday. It's Owen's first birthday, and we're doing a thing at the park. I need someone to manage the food table and help keep the little ones corralled." I told her I couldn't. I said it plainly, without apology, the way my doctor had told me to speak for the next few weeks. No stress, no overexertion. I said my pressure was still being monitored and I wasn't supposed to spend a long day on my feet outdoors in July heat. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So you're choosing not to come to your grandson's first birthday?" I felt it settle in my chest like a cold stone. Not what she said. How she said it. I explained again. She interrupted me. "Mom, I'm not asking you to run a marathon. I just need help at a birthday party. Other people manage their health without using it as an excuse." I didn't say anything after that. What I wanted to say was that 2 days ago a cardiologist had written the words hypertensive urgency on my chart, and that those weren't words people invented for convenience. But I have learned, in 68 years, that when someone has already decided the shape of your selfishness, explaining yourself is just handing them more clay. I said I was sorry I couldn't be there. I told her I loved Owen and I'd bring his gift another time, when I was steadier on my feet. She hung up without saying goodbye. The text came 40 minutes later. I was making myself a bowl of oatmeal, moving slowly, the way the discharge instructions said. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up and read it, standing there with the spoon still in my hand. "We've decided it's better if you don't come by for a while. The kids pick up on tension and we don't want that energy around Owen. Please respect that." I read it 3 times. I set the phone down. I finished making my oatmeal. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the window and listened to the refrigerator hum. "We've decided." Like a committee had met, like there were minutes taken. My son-in-law had never said more than 12 words to me about anything important. He watched football. He smoked on the back porch when he thought no one noticed. He'd asked me 3 years ago if I could lend them money for a deck addition, and I had, because I thought a yard that the kids could play in sounded like something worth building. That was $6,000 I'd never mentioned again, because mentioning it felt worse than losing it. I didn't drive to her house. My doctor had said no long drives for a week anyway, but I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes. Just sat. The engine off. The garage smelling of old cardboard and motor oil. I'd helped them buy that house, not the way you help someone pick out paint colors, the way you stand in a bank office and sign documents that make you responsible for someone else's future. They hadn't qualified for the loan on their own. My daughter had called me crying, said they'd found the perfect place for the kids to grow up. And couldn't I please just co-sign? She promised they'd refinance in 2 years and get my name off it. That had been 4 years ago. My name was still on it. Back inside, I found myself doing what I always did when things got too large to hold. I went to the filing cabinet in the second bedroom. I opened the bottom drawer. I kept records, not because I'd ever planned to use them. I'm a retired bookkeeper. It's simply what I do. 31 years balancing ledgers for a manufacturing company in Dayton will do that to a person. Columns become a comfort. Numbers tell the truth even when people won't. I spread the papers on the bed. The co-signed mortgage, $6,000 for the deck, $1,400 to cover the gap when my son-in-law changed jobs and their health insurance lapsed for 2 months, $800 for my granddaughter Bea's preschool registration when the payment bounced, a plane ticket I bought them so they could attend a wedding in Phoenix and couldn't afford the flights. Groceries, 3 separate periods when things were tight and they didn't ask directly, but my daughter mentioned they were eating through their pantry. I sat with all of it laid out in front of me and I did what a bookkeeper does. I added it up. $31,400 some dollars. Over 6 years. Give or take the things I'd never written down. The cash I pressed into my daughter's hand at Christmas when she said they were stressed. The gift cards I bought for school supplies. The afternoons I drove 40 minutes each way to pick up Bea from school so they didn't have to pay aftercare fees. I am not the kind of woman who keeps score. I want to say that clearly because I know how this sounds. But there is a difference between keeping score and knowing what is real. I'd spent 6 years telling myself this was love. This was what family did. This was temporary. Until they got on their feet. And they had gotten on their feet. They had a deck now. They took the kids to Disney last spring. My son-in-law got a promotion. And I was still a name on their mortgage and still the person they called when things were tight. And still apparently the person expected to stand at a food table in 90-degree heat 2 days after a hospital stay. The stone in my chest wasn't going anywhere. I slept poorly that night. Not the spiraling kind of sleeplessness. The quiet kind. The kind where you're fully awake and very still and your mind is just sorting through things with the lights on. By morning, I'd made a decision. I called my attorney. Her name is Sheila, and she'd helped me update my estate documents after my husband passed. She was direct, careful, and she never talked to me like I was a sentimental old woman who needed protecting from herself. Her receptionist fit me in for Thursday. I thanked her and hung up, and then I sat with the phone in my lap for a minute, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Something clearer than anger. Like I'd finally found the light switch in a room I'd been moving around in the dark for years. I spent Wednesday cleaning up a hall closet, not because it needed it, though it did, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I filled a trash bag, then another. Old coats, mismatched mittens, a broken umbrella I'd been stepping around for 2 years. At the back of the shelf, I found a shoebox I didn't recognize at first. Inside was a stack of birthday cards from Bea. She'd been making them herself since she was 4. Crayon drawings, stickers peeling off the fronts, my name spelled wrong in that wonderful way. Small children spell things. And Nadine. Nadine! Nadine! I sat down right there on the hallway floor and went through every one. I didn't cry, but I sat there a long time. Sheila's office smelled like coffee and old carpet in a way that felt familiar and oddly comforting. I sat across from her desk in a chair that was just slightly too soft, and I laid out what I wanted. I wanted to remove my daughter and her husband as primary beneficiaries from my estate. I wanted to revoke the financial power of attorney I'd granted her 2 years ago when my blood pressure had first started being a concern. And I wanted to set up a direct educational trust for my grandchildren, Bea and Owen, that would bypass their parents entirely. Sheila listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. Was I feeling any pressure from anyone to make these changes? No. Had I considered whether I wanted to include any provision for my daughter? I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, yes, actually. I'd like to leave her the dining room table. It had been her grandmother's. She'd always said she wanted it someday. Sheila almost smiled. We can do that, she said. We worked through the documents for 2 hours. I signed where she pointed. With each page, I felt something release. Not dramatically. The way a muscle stops clenching when you finally put down something heavy. Before I left, she handed me the draft of the POA revocation. If your daughter attempts to act on your behalf with any bank or institution, this will flag it. They'll be required to contact you directly. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my purse. Thank you, Sheila. She walked me to the door. Take care of yourself, Nadine. I intend to, I said. That was the truest thing I'd said in months. The next morning, I called the bank. It took 4 transfers and 1 hold that lasted long enough for me to finish a full cup of tea, but eventually I reached a man in the accounts department who had the specific authority to handle what I needed. I want to cancel all recurring transfers to my daughter's household, I said, and I need to request a full statement of all outgoing transfers to her accounts over the past 7 years. He asked if I'd like to verify the amounts first, just to confirm. I said no, I already knew them. Just cancel and send the statement. He processed it while I waited, told me the cancellations would take effect within 1 business day. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Yes, I said. I need to remove her as a secondary account holder on my checking account and update my beneficiary designations on my savings. He walked me through it. It took another 20 minutes. I wrote down every confirmation number on a yellow legal pad. When I hung up, I looked at the pad. 7 lines of numbers. Evidence of nothing dramatic. Just a woman finally getting her own house in order. 2 days later, my son-in-law called. I saw his name on the screen and I answered because I thought something might actually be wrong with one of the kids. My heart does that. It still goes to worst case before I can stop it. Nadine, hey, he sounded careful, arranged, the way people sound when they've been coached by someone standing nearby. Hi, I said. Is everyone all right? Oh, yeah, no, everyone's fine. He paused. I actually wanted to reach out because, I noticed the auto transfer from your account didn't go through this week. I wasn't sure if there was a banking issue or something. There was no banking issue, I said. A silence. Long enough that I could hear his television in the background. He muted it. So you stopped it on purpose? Yes. Another silence. Okay, can I ask why? I kept my voice even, because my daughter told me not to come around, and I've decided to take her at her word. I heard him exhale. Okay, look, I think there may have been some miscommunication. She was stressed about the party, things got out of hand. She sent me a text, I said. It was very clear. He shifted. You know how she gets. She doesn't always mean. She sent me a text, I repeated, 2 days after I left the hospital, telling me not to come by. I'm simply respecting that. There was a long quiet. Then, this is going to cause a lot of problems. I thought about telling him that I hadn't caused any problems, that problems had already been caused, and I was simply the first person to notice. But I didn't. Instead, I said, I hope the birthday party was everything you wanted it to be. Give Owen a kiss from me. I ended the call. My daughter's texts came within the hour. 3 paragraphs long. She said I was creating unnecessary hardship, that the mortgage payment was coming up, and I knew their budget was tight after the party, that pulling support without warning was cruel, and that she couldn't believe I would do this over what she'd called a misunderstanding. She did not use the word misunderstanding to describe the lock on the door. She did not mention the hospital. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Then I opened my notebook, the small one I keep in my purse, and I wrote, She called canceling the money a cruelty. She did not call the text a cruelty. Noted. I didn't respond. I did call my niece, though. My brother's youngest daughter, a woman named Isabel who lived in Asheville, and called me every Sunday just to talk. Not about anything urgent. About her garden and her book club and the ongoing situation with her upstairs neighbor's wind chimes. She had driven 8 hours to sit with me in the hospital when my husband was dying, and she had never once asked me for anything in return. She answered on the second ring. Aunt Nadine, she said, and her voice was just warm, the uncomplicated kind. I said, I need to tell you something, and I'm okay, but I need someone to know what happened. I told her everything, start to finish. She didn't interrupt. She made small sounds now and then, the kind that let you know a person is still with you. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've watched you give to them for years. I've never said anything because it wasn't my place, but I want you to know I saw it." That was it. That was all she said about it, and somehow that was exactly enough. We talked for another hour about other things. A week passed. I went back to my cardiologist for my follow-up appointment. My pressure was down. She said whatever I was doing, keep doing it. I told her I'd done some filing. She looked at me like that was an odd thing to say, and I didn't explain further. I began going for short walks in the morning. Nothing strenuous. Just to the end of the block and back twice. My neighborhood was quiet that time of day, just sprinklers and birds and the occasional dog walker who nodded the way people do when they haven't yet decided if they know you. I started to look forward to it, the routine of it, the feeling of air that hadn't been filtered through a window screen. My former colleague stopped by one morning. She'd retired the same year I had, and we'd stayed loosely in touch the way retired people do, a lunch every few months, a card at the holidays. Her name was June. No, wait. She went by her middle name, Bertie, short for Bertha, which she'd despised since childhood. She showed up at my door with a foil-covered plate of lemon bars, and that particular expression people wear when they've heard something and are working out whether to say so. "I heard from your daughter," she said, before she was even through the door. She came right out with it, which I'd always appreciated about her. I stepped aside. "Come in, Bertie." She sat at my kitchen table and put the lemon bars down and said, "She called me asking if you seemed okay. Said you'd been acting erratic since your hospital stay. Said she was worried about your judgment." I set the kettle on. "Is that right?" I told her you were the most clear-headed woman I'd ever balanced a budget with, and that if you were doing something that looked erratic to her, you probably had an excellent reason. I smiled at that. I told Bertie what had happened. She listened with her arms folded and her chin up, the way she listened to everything, like she was taking a deposition. When I finished, she said, "She changed the arrangements on your account and then texted you not to come by?" "In that order, yes. Well, she texted first, then called about the money." Bertie picked up a lemon bar and took a bite and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some people only notice a river when it runs dry." We sat there for a while and it was the most uncomplicated I'd felt in weeks. After she left, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I sat at the piano. I played since I was 7, though. Not seriously, never seriously, just the way some people hum. I played a few hymns I still remembered. And then I played a Carole King song I'd loved in my 30s. And then I just sat there with my hands in my lap and felt the quiet settle around me like something earned. My phone lit up, a voicemail. I almost didn't listen. But it was Bea's voice. She was 6. She said, "Grandma, hi, it's me. We had cake yesterday, and I saved you a piece in my head because Mommy said you weren't coming. I hope your heart is better. I drew you something. It's a horse. Daddy says it looks like a potato, but it's a horse. Okay, bye." I pressed play again and listened twice more. Then I saved it. I wrote her name on the notepad by the phone. Not as a reminder, as a beginning. The letter from my daughter arrived 4 days later. Real stationery, the cream-colored kind she'd bought in bulk years ago for thank-you notes. Her handwriting was neat, the way it had always been. Nothing like her voice when she was upset. The letter began without a greeting. Just, "Mom, what you're doing is affecting our entire family, and I don't think you understand the ripple effects of your decisions." She wrote that she'd had no choice but to send that text, that she'd been overwhelmed, that I had to understand the pressure she was under. She wrote that she still wanted me in their lives, but I needed to meet them where they were. She wrote that pulling financial support without warning was a form of manipulation. She wrote that she was open to a conversation if I was willing to approach it with grace. She didn't mention the hospital. She didn't mention the text's exact words. She didn't apologize. I read the letter once, carefully all the way through. Then I folded it along its original creases and placed it in the filing cabinet in the folder marked correspondence. Not the trash, not the fireplace, the filing cabinet where I kept things that were real. And then I sat down and wrote a letter of my own. Not one I would send, just one I needed to exist. I taught you to say please and thank you. I taught you that other people's time mattered. I taught you that love was not a transaction. Somewhere along the way, what I modeled became what you expected from me, and nothing you expected of yourself. I don't know when that happened. I've been trying to figure it out for a week, and I keep arriving at the same answer. It doesn't matter when. It matters that I see it now. I folded that one and put it in the drawer of my nightstand. Not for anyone else, just for me. That Sunday, Isabel called, as she always did. She asked how I was sleeping. I told her better. She told me about a hiking trail she'd done near Chimney Rock and described the view in a way that made me feel like I was there. The ridgeline and the blue spreading out below it. Then she asked, carefully, how I felt about everything. I said I felt lighter than I had in a long time. I said I felt like something had been returned to me, though I couldn't name it exactly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come visit. I mean it. Come stay for a few days. We'll hike the easy trail and I'll make that soup you like." I said, "Maybe." She knew that meant yes. I finished the estate paperwork on a Wednesday morning. Sheila called to confirm everything was executed. The educational trust for Bea and Owen was fully funded and would be administered by a third party with no access by their parents until the children reached 18, at which point it would be available for education or, if not used, released to them directly at 25. My niece Isabel was named primary beneficiary of the house and my accounts. My daughter would receive the dining room table, as specified. I thanked Sheila. She said, "You've done something brave." It didn't feel brave. It felt like bookkeeping. It felt like finally correcting a ledger that had been running wrong for years. I went for my walk that afternoon. The air was cooler, a front having moved through overnight. At the end of the second block, I passed a woman I recognized from the neighborhood, a retired teacher who walked a large, slow beagle, named something I always forgot. We'd spoken a handful of times over the years, but never really talked. She looked at me and said, "I've seen you out here every morning this week. You look like you're doing well." I said I was getting there. She said, "That's all any of us are doing." We stood for a moment in the way neighbors sometimes stand, without agenda, just two people in the same slice of morning. Then her beagle pulled at the leash and she smiled and moved on. I walked home slowly. My knees were fine. My chest felt open. My daughter sent one more message that week, brief this time. Just, "You've made your choice. I hope it was worth it." I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed back, only the second message I'd sent her since this all began. Just 3 words, "I believe so." And I turned the phone, face down on the counter, and went to water my geraniums on the back step. The call from Bea came on a Saturday. She'd apparently gotten hold of her father's phone because she asked immediately if this was Grandma's number, and when I said yes, she made a sound like a small explosion of happiness that only 6-year-olds can produce on command. She said she wanted to come over and show me the horse drawing. I said I would love nothing more. She said, "Daddy says maybe next weekend. Can I tell him yes?" I said yes. She said, "Okay, bye, love you, bye." And she was gone. I stood in my kitchen for a moment with the phone in my hand, and I felt something move through me that I didn't have a clean word for. Not forgiveness, not victory, something more like understanding. The understanding that I had not lost my granddaughter, that whatever her parents had decided, she had not decided it, that she was 6 years old and she thought I was someone worth calling. The next Saturday, a car pulled up. My son-in-law stayed in it. My daughter did not get out, but Bea did, wearing her backpack and holding a rolled-up piece of paper with both hands, and she walked up my front path like she owned it. I opened the door before she knocked. She unrolled the drawing on my kitchen table. It was a horse, orange with what appeared to be 4 legs and possibly a wing, details unclear, confidence absolute. I said it was beautiful. She said, "Daddy said potato, but what does he know?" I laughed, a real one, the kind that fills up the room. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and ate them at the table, and she told me everything that had happened at school since I'd last seen her, which turned out to be a great deal. By the time her father knocked on the door 2 hours later, she was in my recliner with a blanket and my old copy of Charlotte's Web, which she could mostly read on her own and was very proud of. He stood in the doorway. We looked at each other. I didn't invite him in. I didn't refuse him either. I simply stood in the space between us, and he looked at his daughter in the chair, and something moved across his face that I couldn't name and didn't try to. "She's good," I said. He nodded. "Thanks," he said, and that was all. When Bea hugged me goodbye, she held on long enough that I had to breathe through it. She smelled like my shampoo because she'd asked to use it when she washed her hands and ended up washing her entire head in the bathroom sink, which is something I'll carry for a long time. She said, "Same time next week?" I said, "Any time you want." After I closed the door, I stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was quiet again, the way it had been quiet for weeks, but different now. Not empty, just mine. I walked back to the kitchen and cleaned up the plates and put the drawing on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the state of Ohio, which Bea had given me for my birthday 2 years ago because she thought Ohio was a funny word. I opened my notebook and added one more line to the list I'd started weeks before. Things I still love: Bea's certainty, horse drawings that look like potatoes, the specific quiet of a house that belongs to you. I didn't wait for anyone to hand me my own life. I just finally stopped giving it away. I used to think that giving without keeping track was the highest form of love. I believed it so completely that I never questioned it, not even when I was signing my name to a mortgage I had no ownership in, not even when I was wiring money on a fixed income because someone else's budget was tight. I told myself, that's what good mothers do, that's what family means. What I understand now, sitting on the other side of all of it, is that I confused generosity with erasure. Every time I said yes when I meant no, I was teaching the people around me something untrue, that I had no edges, no limits, no needs worth naming. And people, even people we love, will believe what we show them. My daughter didn't become entitled out of nowhere. I showed her year after year that my answer would always be yes, that my health was negotiable, that my comfort was a secondary consideration. The cause and the effect were always connected. I just hadn't been willing to look at both ends of the line at the same time. The intelligence I wish I'd used sooner wasn't complicated. It was just honest accounting, not the cold kind. I wasn't trying to punish anyone when I spread those papers across my bed and added up $31,000. I was just finally willing to see clearly what had been true for years. Clear-headedness is its own form of courage. It means you stop telling yourself the story that makes everyone comfortable and start telling yourself the one that's actually happening. And then there's the harder thing, doing something about it once you see it. That's the part that took everything I had, not the phone calls, not the paperwork, not even the conversation with Sheila in her too cold office. The hard part was the moment I realized I might lose my daughter's approval permanently and decided to proceed anyway. That's not stubbornness. That's the specific kind of strength that only becomes available to you when you finally believe your own life is worth protecting. I didn't find it all at once. I found it in increments, in the filing cabinet, in the walk to the end of the block, in the moment I picked up the phone and heard Bea's voice say, "I hope your heart is better," and knew that the thing I was protecting was real and worth the cost. What saved me, in the quietest sense of the word, was the people who showed up without being asked. Isabel calling every Sunday, Bertie with her lemon bars and her direct eyes, Bea with a horse drawing that looked like a potato. None of them needed anything from me. They just came. And in that contrast, I saw clearly for the first time what care actually looks like when it's genuine. It doesn't arrive with a list of conditions stapled to the back. If you've been the person who always says yes, who keeps the peace, Who gives until there's a groove worn into the floor where you stand? I'm not going to tell you that changing course is easy. It isn't. It costs something real. But I'll tell you what I wrote in my notebook on an ordinary Tuesday after a cardiologist told me my blood pressure was finally coming down. The cost of staying was higher. It was just spread out over so many years that it didn't look like a cost at all. It looked like love. It wasn't. Love doesn't leave you standing in a driveway wondering if your key still works.